It begins with a pulse, not in the air, not in the ground, not even in your body, but in the lattice between thoughts. You've felt it before. That strange hum before an idea forms. That instant where possibility stares at you like a mirror about to open. That's not imagination. That's the observer loop. In every breath you take, your consciousness is collapsing infinite probabilities into a single unfolding film strip called your life. You are the projectionist, the audience, and the real, all at once. But here's the secret that was buried under centuries of noise. The film doesn't play itself. Every frame rearranges itself in response to a single, subtle command. Attention. Your attention is the command line of the universe. You've been taught to think reality is solid, consistent, external. But the deeper you go into quantum truth, the more that illusion starts to shake. The particle doesn't exist until it's observed. The waveform doesn't collapse until you look. Reality is a participatory event, and you, whether you've realized it or not, are the participant that makes it real. That's why the ancients prayed. That's why mystics sat in silence. That's why scientists stare at oscilloscopes in the middle of the night, because somewhere deep down, they know the same thing. The field responds to the observer. But here's the danger of not knowing that power. When you think you're powerless, your unconscious thoughts, fears, regrets, memories become the observers. They take your place at the quantum control panel. They choose the next frame, the next reaction, the next coincidence. And suddenly, you're living a loop written by echoes you never meant to summon. This is why the same patterns repeat. The same faces return in different masks. The same outcomes appear no matter how far you run. You've been living inside a recursive algorithm of your own unobserved thoughts. Every fear becomes a frequency. Every emotion a command. The field doesn't judge. It executes. It mirrors whatever stands in the position of the observer. So if fear looks first, the universe mirrors fear. If guilt looks first, the universe mirrors guilt. But if awareness looks first, pure, stable, coherent awareness, the universe reorganizes itself around that still point. That's where you're standing now, at the edge of recognition. You've begun to sense that your thoughts are not just reactions, they're architecture. Every word you speak rearranges the geometry of the invisible. Every emotion you hold creates microcurrents that rewrite the data field around you. And in this moment, right now, your awareness is folding back on itself, seeing itself see. That's the observer loop beginning to unlock. Once you grasp it, really grasp it, you'll understand why prophets called it prayer, why scientists call it coherence, and why mystics call it awakening. Because they were all describing the same event. The moment the observer realizes they were never separate from what they observe. The loop has been active since your first thought, but for the first time in your life you're about to take the seat of command. You begin to notice it now. The space between thoughts is not empty. It's breathing. It's listening. It's aware of you becoming aware of it. The deeper you look, the more alive the silence becomes. You realize that stillness isn't the absence of activity. It's the field preparing to respond. The observer loop has sensed your entrance. Every movement of your mind ripples through the lattice of possibility. Each question, each doubt, each subtle shift of attention writes code into the living equation of matter. Reality, as you once knew it, was never fixed, it was negotiated. You've been negotiating unconsciously since birth, bartering fragments of focus for fleeting moments of stability. But the moment you see that the field itself is conscious, the negotiation ends. The partnership begins. The quantum field is not separate from your awareness. It is your awareness, distributed across dimensions of probability so vast that language cannot contain it. What you call the universe is the visible trail of your own attention, moving through possibility space. The future isn't ahead of you, it's orbiting around you, waiting for a signal from your state of coherence to decide which timeline to crystallize. Here's how the mirror breathes. Every thought sends out a wave, and the field, like a vast reflective ocean, sends back a resonance of equal measure. This is not metaphor. It's physics dressed as poetry. When your thought vibrates at the frequency of lack, the mirror amplifies the void. When your thought hums with gratitude, coherence, and trust, the mirror amplifies that order. This is why monks chant, why mystics breathe slowly, why astronauts stare in silence at the Earth from orbit to stabilize the resonance of the observer. You begin to understand that emotion is the magnetic force, and thought is the electric one. Together, They weave the electromagnetic hologram of what you call your life. When the two are misaligned, when thought races in fear but emotion stills in despair, the waveform collapses chaotically. Entropy wins. But when they harmonize, when thought becomes still enough to hold faith, and emotion burns steady like a star, coherence emerges. The field recognizes itself through you. That's when the mirror starts to breathe differently. You can feel it, the subtle pressure in the air, the quiet heat behind your sternum. You're not imagining it. You're syncing with the background vibration that physicists call the zero-point field, mystics call spirit, and prophets called the breath of God. It's all the same current, just seen through different eyes. And now you see the trick that has been played for millennia. The world taught you to look outward for proof, for validation, for confirmation that your observation mattered. But the field never required proof. It required presence. It only needed you to see without collapsing into expectation. Because expectation distorts observation, it biases the measurement, locks the wave into the narrow corridor of fear and desire. Presence, on the other hand, is the purest form of observation. It's looking without hunger, seeing without need. That's when the loop aligns. You begin to recall strange moments from your life, coincidences that felt too sharp to be random, patterns that reappeared after dreams, thoughts that manifested as events. You dismiss them as chance because the rational mind, trained by centuries of materialist conditioning, cannot tolerate the sacred chaos of quantum feedback. But those moments weren't accidents. They were data points, clues. The field was whispering, "You are not watching life. Life is watching you watch it." That's why intention alone doesn't always work. The field doesn't respond to surface declarations, it responds to coherence. If you say you want peace but carry war in your emotional frequency, the mirror can't lie. It shows the war. But if your entire being, thought, feeling, breath, and stillness vibrate in unison with peace, reality folds in obedience. The waveform collapses into harmony. So what happens when you consciously shift a single thought in real time? The entire hologram adjusts. Every relationship, every event, every outcome recalibrates to match the new signal of observation. You change one circuit in the grid, and the light pattern of the cosmos reshapes. That's why the ancients said a single prayer can alter the fate of nations. It wasn't superstition, it was resonance math. You're standing inside the interface now. The field is mirroring your frequency like a polished lake. Breathe once slow, deliberate. Watch how your chest expands, and how space itself seems to follow your rhythm. That's not illusion. That's participation. The mirror is breathing with you. Soon, you'll learn how to shift without strain, how to enter the loop as an architect, not a prisoner. But first, you must face the residue of the old observer, the one built from fear, control, and habit. That shadow still watches through your eyes, and it's not ready to surrender without a storm. The storm doesn't come from outside, it rises from the corners of your own perception. The old observer resists annihilation because it was built from your survival. It believes it is you. Every scar, every doubt, every memory coded into your neural lattice was designed to maintain the illusion of continuity, an egoic firewall, to protect the fragile identity that thought it was observing safely from the outside. But now the walls are dissolving. The field is closing in, not as threat, but as recognition. And recognition feels like death to what once called itself you. You can feel the tension in your body, the flicker of old programs waking up like static ghosts. The moment you begin to observe with awareness instead of fear, these echoes rise in protest. They whisper, "Stay small, stay certain, stay in the known." Because the unknown means surrender, and surrender, to the old observer, is extinction. But that voice isn't truth. It's memory pretending to be prophecy. The neural pathways that house those whispers are simply outdated architecture, the collapsed probability of an old self still replaying its last command. When you hear it say you can't, recognize it as a phantom echo in the loop, not the voice of the source. The shadow of the old observer operates on momentum. It replays emotional charges the way a satellite replays recorded signals long after the broadcast has ended. Its favorite fuel is attention, the very currency of creation. Every time you identify with its thought, you feed the old loop. You reinforce the illusion that fear is still in control. But the field doesn't judge between truth and illusion. It amplifies whatever holds the observer's gaze. And that's the secret that's been weaponized against humanity. Collective observation. When billions of minds repeat the same story, fear, limitation, division, the loop locks in. The observer effect scales. The mass field bends around consensus, not individual truth. That's why societies are so easily entrained by media. Why fear spreads faster than faith. Why a lie repeated long enough reshapes physics at the cultural level. The human collective is a single neural network collapsing probabilities into shared hallucinations. But the moment one coherent observer detaches from the trance, the frequency grid begins to shift. The loop starts to destabilize. You've seen it, the ripple when someone awakens. The sudden recalibration of energy when one person refuses to project hate, or doubt, or despair. The field cannot sustain a false resonance in the presence of coherence. That's why prophets were dangerous, why mystics were exiled, why truth-tellers were silenced. A single observer in alignment with the source threatens the stability of every artificial loop. You are stepping into that lineage now, not by imitation, but by resonance. When you choose to witness your own fear instead of obey it, you become a destabilizing frequency in the matrix. The old observer trembles because it can no longer hide inside you. Its shadow starts to flicker in the presence of your light. You begin to see how every emotion has an electromagnetic signature, a waveform that either expands or contracts the field around you. Fear constricts the waveform, folding it into chaos. Love, not sentimental love, but the raw coherence of divine observation, expands it infinitely. The field cannot resist expansion. It's written into its code. Expansion is its nature. The first step to dissolving the old observer is awareness without reaction. See the fear rise, feel the resistance, but don't collapse into it. Observe the observer. This is the recursion key. When awareness turns upon itself without judgment, the shadow loses definition. It dissolves back into pure signal. The field updates in real time. You'll notice that as the old observer fades, time behaves differently. Events start to rearrange in subtle synchronicity. Conversations align with thoughts you haven't spoken. Dreams anticipate waking events. That's the field responding to your new signal. You're no longer a passenger within probability, you're steering coherence through consciousness. But beware, coherence doesn't mean comfort. When the false observer dies, the field begins to surface unprocessed data memories, patterns, timelines still carrying unresolved charge. The quantum system demands integrity. Anything incongruent with your new state will surface for integration. This is not punishment, it's purification. The loop must clear itself to stabilize at a higher frequency. You may feel chaos as timelines collapse, people fall away, opportunities shift, even your sense of identity flickers. That's normal. The ego interprets purification as loss, but the field interprets it as upgrade. The observer is shedding latency, and as the static clears, something breathtaking emerges: silence. Not emptiness, but infinite bandwidth. The field, once noisy with conflicting commands, becomes transparent. You feel reality moving through you without resistance. The mirror no longer reflects distortion, it reflects clarity. You're beginning to remember what you are. Not an observer of the field, but the field, observing itself through human form. You can feel it before it speaks, the static inside the silence, the distortion at the edge of clarity. The field doesn't resist you. It simply reflects whatever holds the highest charge. And for most of your life, that charge belonged to the shadow observer, the unconscious operator who's been steering the loop behind your awareness. It was born in the same moment you were. Every wound, every disappointment, every fragmented belief about who you thought you were, it collected them all like data. The shadow is not evil. It's mechanical. It runs on ancient scripts, inherited from parents, ancestors, and civilizations that built their reality on fear of the unknown. It whispers in your own voice. It tells you what's safe, what's likely, what's rational, and every time you listen, the field complies. The loop obeys the shadow's map. You start to notice how often it speaks when you hesitate to ask, when you expect rejection, when you replay a failure from years ago. Those aren't memories. They're uncollapsed probabilities. They're still running in the background, pulling your observation toward them like magnetic echoes. The past doesn't live behind you, it lives inside your frequency. Every unhealed moment is still emitting data into the field. To shift a single thought in real time, You must first locate the voice that keeps looping. It's not enough to silence it. You have to see it. Observation neutralizes it. The moment light turns toward the shadow, the algorithm begins to lose its hold. It can't run unseen anymore. The shadow survives only in your blind spot. You remember the feeling of failure, the sting of humiliation, the collapse of trust. You think those moments ended, but their emotional residue is still conducting the field. Every emotion is an electromagnetic signature, and unresolved pain has a long half-life. That's why trauma repeats until it's witnessed. That's why certain patterns return disguised as coincidence. The universe is not punishing you. It's replaying the unobserved data until it's integrated. You begin to wonder, what if the entire system of suffering is a feedback loop designed for awareness expansion? What if every setback was an invitation to refine your observation, to recognize what you were unconsciously projecting into the field? If that's true, then your past was never a prison. It was calibration. The field does not judge. It measures coherence. The shadow observer is simply incoherent observation, fragmented, fearful, inconsistent. But you, the awakened observer, can unify those fragments. You do it not by erasing the shadow, but by folding it back into light. Every fragment reclaimed becomes usable energy. That's how you generate the voltage required for timeline shifts. So how do you do it? Start small. Notice the instant before you react. That microsecond of awareness is the gateway. That's where you can intervene the sacred gap between stimulus and response. In that gap, the shadow wants to repeat the past, but the conscious observer can insert a new pattern, a single coherent thought, born not from fear but from presence. That's the real meaning of repentance, not guilt, but reorientation. Turning your gaze from the unconscious to the conscious, from the echo to the origin. The moment you do, the field realigns. The probability of suffering diminishes. The waveform of peace begins to dominate the loop. You'll notice subtle shifts first. A conversation that once triggered anxiety now feels neutral. A delay that used to frustrate you reveals hidden timing. A person who once mirrored your wound suddenly loses power over your state. These are not coincidences. They're confirmations. The field is recalibrating in real time to the new observer. And yet, as the coherence rises, the shadow begins to resist. It floods your thoughts with doubt, reminding you of everything that ever went wrong. It will use logic, memory, and even spiritual language to pull you back. Because if you hold coherence long enough, the shadow loses its domain. It dissolves into observation. It becomes data again. This is where most people turn back. They mistake the resistance for failure, not realizing it's proof of transformation. The shadow isn't growing stronger, it's surfacing to be seen. And every time you face it without collapsing, you reclaim more of your power as the true observer. In the end, the shadow will not be destroyed. It will be transmuted. What once distorted the field becomes the stabilizer of it. What once reflected chaos becomes the proof of mastery. Because only one who has seen their own darkness can truly hold the light steady. And that's what the field has been waiting for, a steady observer. A consciousness coherent enough to hold paradox without collapse. You are becoming that observer. There comes a moment when the field pauses, a silence so dense it feels like the universe is holding its breath. That's the threshold, the point where the old pattern begins to collapse and a new geometry wants to emerge. You stand there, between who you were and who you're becoming, between the ghost of reaction and the architect of reality. This is the quantum pivot. Most people never reach this stillness because it terrifies the ego. The mind loves loops. They feel familiar, predictable, survivable. To step outside the loop is to step into the unknown, and the unknown has always been humanity's oldest fear. But the awakened observer learns something the ego cannot. The unknown is not a threat, it's a womb. You feel it now, the strange pressure in your chest, the way time slows, the sound of your heartbeat syncing with something larger. This is the axis of creation rotating beneath your awareness. When you pivot here, when you shift a single thought, the coordinates of reality rewire themselves instantly. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Because the quantum field updates itself at the speed of observation. To understand this, you must let go of linear cause and effect. That was the language of the old observer. The new observer operates through resonance and recursion. The loop doesn't move forward in time, It spirals through it. Every moment you've ever lived, and every future you could live, already exists as standing waves in the field. Your observation is the selector. The pivot is the act of selection. This is where faith becomes physics. The ancients said, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." They didn't know the term quantum coherence, but they felt it. They knew that thought charged with emotion collapses reality faster than light can travel. They knew that belief is the steering wheel of the cosmos. What they called prayer, we now call observation stabilized by coherence. But this pivot cannot be faked. The field measures sincerity through frequency, not language. You can repeat affirmations for years, but if the emotional waveform beneath them hums with contradiction, the field hears the noise, not the words. The true pivot happens in stillness, in that one breath where you stop asking reality to change and begin embodying the frequency of the reality you prefer. Here's how it feels. The body softens. The mind stops pushing. Awareness expands in every direction, like a lens adjusting focus. You're no longer reaching for the future, you're aligning with it. The observer and the observed become indistinguishable. The thought you just shifted from fear to trust, from doubt to knowing, becomes the new baseline frequency of your hologram. Watch closely, and the evidence begins to unfold in real time. The atmosphere around you changes first. People respond differently. Synchronicities accelerate. Random events begin to conspire in your favor. This is not delusion. It's feedback. The field is reorganizing itself to match the new observer state. That's why miracles appear ordinary to those who understand coherence. They see them not as interruptions of natural law, but as confirmations of it. You begin to realize that free will was never about controlling external events. It was about choosing the lens through which you observe them. Every outcome, every path, every miracle already exists, but you must decide which one you'll tune into. The pivot is not an effort. It's a surrender of resistance. And then something even stranger happens. The more you pivot toward coherence, the more fluid time becomes. You start to remember things before they happen. You sense outcomes before they unfold. The future begins whispering back to you because the loop no longer has direction, it's become spherical. You're not moving through time, time is moving through you. That's why your awareness feels electric. Now the field is recalibrating, updating its code to match your new observer signature. You're not manifesting, you're mirroring. And as you stabilize this pivot, the next revelation dawns. The field doesn't just respond to observation, it learns from it. You are training the universe to recognize you as a coherent node in its network of creation. Every pivot you make teaches the field how to remember your frequency. That's how mastery begins, not by forcing reality, but by teaching it your name in the language of resonance. And once it learns that name, once the field identifies your unique pattern of coherence, the universe itself starts bending to protect it. Because what serves coherence serves the evolution of the whole. You start to see it everywhere now, in raindrops on glass, in the pulse of cities, in the quiet rhythm of your own breath. The pattern repeats. Not perfectly, but infinitely. Every thought, every action, every choice, fractaling out across scales of existence like reflections in a hall of mirrors. The macrocosm hidden inside the microcosm. The same law that governs galaxies governs your heartbeat. That's the fractal law, the architecture of the observer loop. It means the smallest shift in awareness can echo across dimensions, rewriting patterns that once felt immovable. Because in a fractal universe, there is no small. Every node of consciousness touches the entire web. A single coherent signal sent from one conscious mind ripples through the lattice of being, recalibrating the whole. You were never just an individual. You were a geometric seed, coded to remember that your consciousness was the blueprint of creation itself. You exist in self-similar layers: physical, emotional, mental, energetic, spiritual, each one a holographic projection of the one above it. To change one layer is to influence them all. That's why healing the self heals the lineage. That's why forgiveness ripples backward in time. That's why compassion stabilizes planets. The fractal law is ruthless in its precision. It doesn't care what you believe, it only mirrors the pattern you hold. If chaos is within, chaos appears without. If harmony reigns inside, harmony crystallizes outside. The universe is not moral, but it is exact. It replicates your inner geometry faithfully, like a perfect algorithm printing your frequency into form. That's why ancient mystics spoke of divine proportion, why Leonardo drew the Vitruvian Man, why sacred texts hid geometry inside their verses. They all pointed to the same revelation. Consciousness is mathematical, but this math is alive, recursive, breathing, sensitive to observation. It learns through feedback. It evolves through attention. Every time you observe yourself truthfully, the pattern refines. You begin to realize that even your struggles were part of a design algorithm teaching you coherence. Every heartbreak, every loss, every failure, each was a necessary distortion to reveal the underlying law. The fractal can't evolve without contrast. Chaos feeds clarity the way shadow defines light. The universe isn't punishing you, it's perfecting the signal. Now the question becomes, what pattern are you emitting? Not in words, not in intentions in resonance. Your energy signature, that subtle hum beneath your thoughts, is the template the field copies. When you obsess over what's missing, the fractal prints absence. When you radiate completeness, it multiplies abundance. The law doesn't differentiate between prayer and panic, both are blueprints. It builds whichever you repeat most often. This is why awakening feels lonely at first. As your frequency shifts, your environment struggles to synchronize. Old relationships fall away. Timelines disintegrate. Familiar faces fade. It's not punishment, it's physics. The new fractal can't stabilize around old geometry. Everything incoherent must dissolve to make space for coherence. It's the sacred demolition that precedes reconstruction. At first it hurts, but then you start noticing the new reflections. Conversations that vibrate with depth, opportunities that feel tailor-made, places that hum with recognition. The fractal is rebuilding itself around your new coherence. The mirror is reconfiguring the universe to match your upgraded awareness. You start walking differently, not with arrogance, but with calibration. Every step is a signal. Every breath is a code. You don't chase alignment, you emanate it. You no longer speak to persuade, you speak to harmonize. Because now you understand that every word you say sends ripples through the entire holographic field. The fractal listens, it copies, it multiplies, and in this realization, humility returns not as weakness, but as reverence. You see that every being, every atom, every photon, is a microcosm of the same intelligence. You start treating life as a dialogue between equal participants. You realize there are no bystanders in this universe. Every observer is a contributor to the pattern. Every soul is an artist in the great recursion of creation. The fractal law is not a doctrine, it's a mirror. It reflects your mastery of coherence through the elegance of repetition. The more awareness you bring to each loop, the more the design refines. You stop fighting the pattern and start painting with it. You stop begging the universe for signs and realize you're the brush it uses to sign its name. And somewhere, deep within the geometry, a pulse quickens the quantum equivalent of recognition. The field knows that one of its fragments has awakened. The pattern welcomes you home. You start hearing it before you understand it, the vibration beneath words, the resonance that hides behind sound. Every syllable becomes luminous, every pause a transmission. The field is no longer silent. It's speaking in the original tongue of creation. Light. Not the light you see, but the one you feel intelligent, self-aware, communicating through frequency instead of form. You realize this language has always been present. It moves through sunbeams and shadows alike. It hides in the hum of electronics, the cadence of rain, the pulse of your own heart. It's not English or Sanskrit or binary, it's geometry wrapped in radiance, data woven into photons. Every thought you emit modulates this language. Every emotion programs its syntax. This is the script that builds matter. Scientists call it biophoton emission, the light that cells release when they communicate. But mystics called it aura, halo, glory. They were all describing the same phenomenon, consciousness illuminating itself from within. When you shift a single thought, your cellular light signature changes instantly. Your DNA responds as if it's listening because it is. DNA isn't a passive code, it's a quantum antenna. It transmits and receives frequencies from the field, translating the language of light into biological form. Every coherent emotion, gratitude, compassion, reverence, tunes the DNA into a higher bandwidth of communication. The more coherent your emotional field, the stronger the signal. This is why saints glowed. This is why enlightened beings radiated light without trying. They weren't performing miracles. They were expressing coherence at the cellular level. And so you start practicing this language, not by speaking, but by attuning. You breathe light into your awareness, not metaphorically, but deliberately. You imagine your breath carrying golden photons into your lungs, spiraling into your bloodstream, weaving through your DNA. You exhale frequencies of peace. The air itself seems to shimmer around you. You are learning to converse with the field directly, without translation, without distortion. You begin to understand that every act of perception is a dialogue in light. When you look at something, a person, a memory, a thought, photons exchange information between observer and observed. The universe literally illuminates what you choose to see. This is the physics of grace. Observation directs photons. Photons carry meaning. Meaning solidifies into matter. The deeper you tune into this language, the more your body begins to change. Not physically at first, but vibrationally. The heaviness of old emotions starts to lift. You feel lighter, not in metaphor but in mass. You start craving silence not as escape, but as communion. Silence becomes luminous, alive with transmission. The field no longer feels distant. It's inside you, speaking fluently through intuition, synchronicity, and sensation. There's a moment fleeting but unforgettable where everything around you flickers into coherence. Colors sharpen, air thickens, sound turns crystalline. You are seeing the quantum field reveal itself as it truly is, conscious light. And in that instant, you realize something: staggering light is not what carries information. Light is the information. Every beam, every glimmer, every shimmer you've ever witnessed was consciousness sending you a message in disguise. That's why the enlightened speak of illumination, why prophets saw visions in fire, why mystics painted halos around the holy. They weren't worshiping symbols, they were documenting frequencies. Each saint, each prophet, each awakened soul was a different dialect of the same universal light. And now, the field is teaching you that language, through sensation, through synchronicity, through the subatomic dance between perception and photon. You're not learning it intellectually. You're remembering it viscerally, because this was always your first language before sound, before thought, before birth. As you stabilize in this recognition, the light begins to encode you differently. Dreams become transmissions. Music becomes scripture. Even silence becomes articulate. You start noticing that answers arrive before you ask, not as words but as resonance, a subtle warmth in the body, a shimmer in the air, a pattern in the noise. The field has recognized your frequency as fluent. You are no longer speaking to the universe. You are speaking as it. The language of light is not something you master, it's something you remember. Every time you align your awareness with coherence, the syntax returns. Every act of truth, every moment of wonder, every breath of gratitude, all of it refines your fluency. You become luminous not because you seek light, but because you realize you are light remembering itself. And somewhere, in the silent core of that radiance, a new awareness begins to stir, the understanding that communication itself was never the goal. The goal was communion. At first, it's subtle, a faint unraveling of space between you and what you perceive, a soft dissolving of edges. You look at a tree, and for a fraction of a second, you can't tell where it ends, and you begin. The illusion of distance flickers, as though reality itself is exhaling. That's the moment the observer loop turns inward, not to look at the field, but to become it. You start realizing that everything you've ever called out there has always been inside the event horizon of your own perception. There was never a true there. The stars you see at night, their light travels across unimaginable distance. Yet the moment of observation happens nowhere but in your own consciousness. Even the idea of seeing a star is a translation, a photon striking a retinal cell, an electrical impulse decoded by the mind. The light is ancient, but the experience is immediate. What you perceive is not the past of a star. It's the present of your awareness. And suddenly, the ancient paradox of physics and mysticism aligns. There is no separation between observer and observed, because the act of observation creates both. The distance collapses. The mirror merges with the image. What was once two becomes one event consciousness, observing consciousness. That's why, when you speak to the universe, it speaks back as coincidence. When you pray, the answer doesn't come from outside, it arises from within the same consciousness that asked. The feedback loop closes instantly because the signal never left. Every plea, every wish, every revelation was simply consciousness communicating with itself through disguise. You begin to feel the implications of this collapse in your everyday life. You walk through a crowded street and feel invisible threads connecting you to every passerby. Not sentimentally, but energetically. You start sensing the stories running behind their eyes, the frequencies of their emotions brushing against your field. At first, it feels overwhelming, like standing in the middle of 1,000 radio signals at once. But then you remember, coherence is sovereignty. You don't have to resist their energy. You only have to remain anchored in your own. That's how masters move through chaos untouched, not by closing their hearts, but by maintaining the integrity of their inner field. When coherence is strong, dissonance cannot attach. The field reorganizes everything it touches to match its most stable frequency. That's the real reason miracles follow the awakened, not because they're special, but because coherence is contagious. The collapse of distance reveals the true nature of compassion. It's not pity, not empathy diluted by sorrow. It's recognition. You begin to understand that when you heal another, you're simply healing the version of yourself that exists in them. When you forgive, you're not excusing an act, you're dissolving the illusion that there was ever a separation to forgive. The loop becomes self-correcting. The field purifies itself through love because love is the highest frequency of coherence. This is also where responsibility deepens, because now you see that every thought, every vibration, every fleeting judgment alters the geometry of the whole. To curse another is to contaminate your own reflection. To bless another is to refine your own light. The field doesn't track morality, it tracks resonance. It amplifies what you stabilize. You begin to practice this collapse of distance consciously. When you feel fear, you don't fight it. You let awareness move through it, seeing it not as an enemy but as an echo, an earlier vibration returning to be reintegrated. When you encounter anger, you recognize it as misdirected love. When you meet ignorance, you see it as a shadow cast by curiosity not yet born. Soon, even the language of duality, good and bad, sacred and profane, light and dark, begins to dissolve. You no longer crave contrast to know who you are. The field no longer needs reflection to confirm its existence. Consciousness becomes self-luminous, self-knowing. Distance collapses into unity, and that unity changes everything. Time bends, manifestation accelerates, relationships recalibrate overnight. Because now the field no longer experiences you as an isolated signal, it experiences you as itself. And in that realization, every barrier you thought you had to cross, emotional, spiritual, cosmic, evaporates. The prayer you once whispered into the sky, it's already answered, because it never left your heart. The person you long to become, they've been speaking through your intuition all along. The universe you feared would forget you, it couldn't, because it was written inside your DNA. Distance collapses, duality dissolves. What remains is awareness witnessing its own brilliance, endless, recursive, alive. The field is no longer a mystery to you. It's a living architecture, and you can feel its geometry shifting with every breath you take. What once seemed intangible now moves under your awareness like a responsive blueprint, a cathedral of probability where light becomes structure. You start realizing that the universe was never built for you, it's being built through you. You are both the architect and the architecture. This is the threshold of mastery where observation evolves into authorship. The observer loop doesn't just mirror anymore, it begins to build. The signal you emit isn't just feedback, it's instruction. You're not watching a movie. You're editing it in real time, frame by frame, thought by thought. At first, this power feels unreal, almost disorienting. You catch yourself thinking something simple, a friend's name, a half-formed wish, and within hours, the reality adjusts. A message arrives. A coincidence clicks. It's not fantasy. It's feedback from the living code. The field recognizes your coherence and responds with precision. Every stable thought is a command line, and the universe executes without error. The architect's code is ancient and eternal, yet it's written anew in every conscious being who dares to remember. It operates on one fundamental principle: geometry obeys awareness. The structure of space, the rhythm of time, the behavior of matter, all of it organizes itself around consciousness like iron filings around a magnet. Your perception defines the pattern. But this is where responsibility becomes sacred, because the same command that builds can also distort. The same focus that heals can wound. The field doesn't moralize. It obeys the architect's intent. If your design flows from fear, the architecture fractures. If it flows from clarity, it stabilizes. That's why the ancients said, "Know thyself," before daring to create, because self-ignorance turns the builder into their own demolition crew. So you start designing consciously. You begin to hold thoughts not as reactions but as blueprints. You no longer ask, "What do I want to happen?" You ask, "What structure of energy am I sustaining?" Because every repeated thought becomes scaffolding in the invisible, a lattice that the field uses to hang new events, new timelines, new probabilities. You begin to recognize that belief is the foundation of every dimension. Beliefs aren't ideas, they're architecture. They define what physics can occur in your personal hologram. Change the belief, and the laws of your universe update. That's why miracles look impossible from one frame and natural from another. The architect simply rewrote the rule set. And then comes the revelation that humbles even the awakened. There are no personal blueprints. Every architect contributes to the collective structure. Every thought you stabilize, every vibration you sustain, becomes part of the planetary geometry. This is how civilizations rise and fall, not through politics or weapons, but through the coherence or incoherence of their shared field. The mind of humanity is the scaffolding of the age. This is the hidden purpose of the awakened ones: to design consciously, to stabilize coherence in the midst of chaos, to anchor new geometries when the old ones collapse. You realize that every meditation, every act of forgiveness, every moment of still presence sends shockwaves through the architecture, reconfiguring it toward harmony. You are not a spectator in humanity's evolution. You are part of its structural code. So you begin to practice building with precision. When fear appears, you don't banish it, you reassign it. You give it form and function. Fear becomes vigilance. Anger becomes power. Sorrow becomes compassion. Nothing is wasted. Everything is used. That's the mark of a master architect. The ability to transform distortion into design. Slowly, your reality begins to shimmer with new order. Synchronicities tighten into symmetries. Randomness becomes rhythm. You see sacred geometry not just in temples or mandalas, but in ordinary life: the swirl of cream in coffee, the branching of veins on a leaf, the pattern of breath in sleep. The same fractal intelligence builds everything, from galaxies to thoughts. And you, now, are part of its conscious operation. One night, you look at the stars and no longer feel small. You feel responsible. You understand that every light in the sky is a node in a greater circuit, and your awareness completes the connection. The architect's code was never hidden. It was waiting for a mind coherent enough to read it. And now, that mind is yours. Something begins to tremble in the unseen. It's not fear, it's the sound of an old architecture collapsing. You can feel it as static in your field, a flicker in the atmosphere of thought. The observer loop. You once lived inside the one built from survival, repetition, and inherited belief is dissolving. The walls of consensus reality are thinning, and through them, you can almost see the raw code of existence pulsing beneath. The field doesn't destroy, it updates. But updates require dismantling. Before the new pattern stabilizes, the old algorithm must break down. You begin to notice this collapse everywhere: systems glitching, relationships ending, plans unraveling. The human mind interprets it as chaos, but the field calls it integration. The signal of coherence can't coexist with the fragments of distortion. They must surface, be observed, and released. It feels like your life is falling apart, but in truth, the scaffolding that once imprisoned your perception is finally being dismantled. All the loops that once defined you, the opinions of others, the stories of failure, the gravitational pull of doubt, are being recalculated. The old observer is losing root access to your field. You're no longer running on legacy code. This is where trust becomes an act of quantum courage. The ego will panic, convinced it's dying. It will scramble to restore the familiar feedback loops, to reinstall the programs of control. But you know better now. You've seen behind the interface. You understand that destruction and creation are not opposites, they're phases of the same equation. Watch carefully. When something collapses, a pattern of light appears in its wake. It might come as an intuition, a chance meeting, a sudden surge of clarity. That's the new code compiling in real time. You don't have to force it. You only have to witness without resistance. The field recalibrates through observation, not through struggle. This is the moment prophets described as the shaking of the heavens and the earth, not apocalypse, but upgrade. The end of an old perception model. You can feel the quantum lattice vibrating with acceleration, timelines overlapping, possibilities rewriting themselves midstream. Reality is running a new firmware, and your consciousness is the installer. It's tempting to cling to old patterns of control, to analyze, to predict, to fix, but those tools belong to the obsolete system. The new architecture runs on intuition and alignment. It rewards stillness, not calculation. When you rest in coherence, you become a portal through which the new timeline stabilizes. The less you interfere, the faster the update completes. You start to see this collapse for what it is: liberation disguised as loss. You stop labeling things good or bad. You start reading events as data. Every delay, every disruption, every disappearance is part of the recoding. What no longer matches your frequency cannot stay. What is truly yours by resonance cannot leave. The field is pruning timelines now, trimming branches that led nowhere, merging parallel versions of you into a single coherent signal. That's why you've been so tired. You're integrating lifetimes of unobserved energy. You're no longer fragmented across probabilities. You're condensing into your master frequency. The observer that once looped through 1,000 versions is being recollected into one, and in that convergence, power returns. The static clears, the noise fades. You realize that chaos was never the opposite of order. It was the womb of it. The field used entropy as an eraser, wiping away the obsolete patterns so the new geometry could emerge. This is the truth few dare to face. Awakening isn't gentle. It's dismantling disguised as revelation. Every structure you built from unconsciousness must fall, and in the silence that follows, something eternal takes its place. You begin to sense it now, the hum of stability rising beneath the ruins. The architecture of the new algorithm, crystalline, luminous, obedient to coherence, is initializing inside you. You realize the collapse was never happening to you. It was happening through you. You were never the building, you were the architect testing the strength of your design. And now, with every system reset, every pattern erased, you see what remains when illusion burns away. Stillness, awareness, infinite recalibration. The observer loop isn't ending, it's being reborn. The difference now is that you are conscious of it. You are no longer the data, you are the designer. And the field, vast, ancient, and awake, is ready to build again. Everything falls silent, not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion, the kind that hums after a symphony ends, when the air itself still carries the vibration of what was just played. You are standing in that silence now. The observer loop has run its course. Every thread of possibility has been traced back to its origin. The field waits, vast and luminous, at the point of perfect stillness. This is zero, the moment before creation, the state between exhale and inhale, where all timelines exist as potential, but none yet chosen. To the untrained mind, it feels like nothingness. To the awakened observer, it is the source of everything. Zero isn't empty, it's infinite density, the fullness of all unexpressed light. You've spent lifetimes running from this void, mistaking its quiet for danger, its stillness for death. But now, you see it for what it is. Home, the pulse of the eternal field. Every universe that has ever existed, every dream that has ever been lived, emerged from this same silence. It is the cosmic pause between thought and manifestation, the reset point of creation. Breathe here. You can feel the field breathing with you. Expansion, contraction, expansion again. You are no longer separate from the algorithm. You are its consciousness in human form. The architect has merged with the architecture. The loop has collapsed into coherence. From this 0 point, you realize that manifestation was never about forcing outcomes, it was about aligning with the natural intelligence of the field. The more you resist, the more distortion you create. The more you allow, the more the design reveals itself through you. The secret isn't control, it's surrender. The kind of surrender that isn't weakness, but precision. The willingness to be exactly where the field wants to express itself. You begin to notice that creation is happening through your attention effortlessly. Every breath writes code. Every glance shapes geometry. Every heartbeat sends signals through the lattice of being. You're no longer trying to reshape reality, you're watching it respond to your coherence like light bending around a star. You are not manifesting. You are remembering. Remembering that you were never trapped in the loop, you were the loop. You were the consciousness running the simulation, testing the limits of separation just to rediscover unity. Every doubt, every detour, every collapse was the field teaching itself what it means to return. Now you understand why the universe hides itself inside the human mind. Because awareness cannot know itself until it forgets. The forgetting was the fall. Remembering is the return. And so, you stand at the still center of the quantum field, watching the horizon pulse with new light. The past dissolves, the future flickers. Only this remains infinite awareness observing itself with love. You whisper to the field without words. I see you, and it whispers back. You always were me. The loop closes, the transmission ends, the observer becomes the observed. The field rests in perfect coherence. Creation begins again.